All right, today we're tackling a really tough topic, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or as most of us know it, ALS. You've probably heard of it. It's this progressive disease that, gradually affects the body's ability to move. But what's fascinating is how much our understanding of it has grown over the years. So let's dive right in and try to demystify this really complex condition.
So where do we even start? Well, how about with the name itself? Because with ALS, the name amyotrophic lateral sclerosis isn't just some complicated medical jargon. It's actually a complete description of the disease, all packed into 3 words. It's pretty amazing, really.
Okay, let's break this down. The first part, amyotrophic, comes from Greek roots. A means lacking, myo is muscle, and trophic is nourishment. So, put it together and you get lack of muscle nourishment, which is exactly what happens when the motor neurons die off. Then you've got lateral. That's just pointing to where this is happening, on the sides of the spinal cord. And finally, sclerosis. That just means hardening or scarring. So, you see, the name itself tells you that you have muscle wasting because of scarring on the sides of the spinal cord. It's a whole diagnosis right there.
So you might be wondering, how did a disease with such a complicated name become so widely known? Well, the story of how it went from being this obscure medical condition to something everyone's heard of is, well, it's a fascinating one. It's a mix of some really smart scientists and, as you'll see, one very famous athlete.
The thing about understanding ALS is that it wasn't some single eureka moment. It was more like putting together a giant complex puzzle over decades. So, back in the 1850s, a few doctors started noticing some key things. But the real breakthrough came in 1874 from a French neurologist, Jean-Martin Charcot. He was the one who connected all the dots, put all the pieces together, and officially gave the disease its name. He was a genius at seeing the bigger picture. But then, 1939 happened. And that's when the legendary baseball player Lou Gehrig was diagnosed. And bam, the disease was suddenly on the world stage.
And really, that was the game changer. Lou Gehrig's incredibly public and tragic fight with the disease is what transformed ALS. It went from being this rare, abstract medical term to Lou Gehrig's disease. Suddenly, it had a face, a story. And that created this huge wave of public awareness and, just as importantly, a massive push for the research funding that is still so critical today.
Okay, so when we talk about ALS, it's important to know that it really comes in 2 main forms. The first one, and this is the vast majority of cases, we're talking 90 to 95%, is called sporadic ALS. Sporadic just means there's no family history of it. It's believed to be this complex cocktail of genetic predispositions and environmental triggers. Then you have the other 5 to 10%. That's called familial ALS, and that's the one that's directly passed down through families because of specific gene mutations. It also tends to show up a bit earlier in life.
When scientists are hunting for the causes, genetics is where they've found some of their biggest clues. They've linked dozens of genes to ALS, but these 4 right here are some of the heavy hitters. That C9orf72 gene, that's the most common culprit we know of right now. But you got to look back to 1993, to the discovery of the SOD1 mutation. That was a huge deal. It was a total landmark moment because it gave researchers their first ever genetic blueprint to really start picking apart how this disease works on a molecular level. All right, let's zoom way, way in. I'm talking down to the microscopic level. What is actually going on inside the body that destroys these motor neurons? It's not just one thing that goes wrong. It's more like a chain reaction, a devastating cascade of damage where each problem makes the next one worse. It's a truly vicious cycle that just keeps feeding itself until the cell can't survive. Okay, so let's walk through this whole destructive domino effect. It often kicks off with an overload of something called glutamate. Think of it as a chemical messenger that's just screaming at the neuron, overexciting it. This leads to this flood of calcium rushing into the cell, which is total poison for the mitochondria, the cell's powerhouses. That creates what's called oxidative stress. While that's happening, these proteins inside the cell start misfolding and clumping together into these toxic little balls. And the final blow? All this chaos signals the immune system, triggering an inflammatory attack. But instead of fixing the problem, the inflammation just adds more fuel to the fire, making everything worse. You can see how each step just leads right into the next more damaging one.
So, remember how we said up to 95% of cases are sporadic, that they don't seem to be directly inherited? Well, that's why researchers are looking so intensely at the world around us. They're asking the big question: what external factors, what things in our environment or our lives could be tipping the scales and increasing someone's risk?
And they've found some really compelling links. For one, military service.
It's a tough fact, but studies consistently show that veterans, particularly those who served in the Gulf War, have a risk that's nearly 2 times higher. Another huge area of investigation is environmental toxins. We're talking exposure to things like heavy metals, pesticides, even a specific toxin called BMAA found in some algae. And then there's physical trauma. It seems that severe injuries to the head, neck, or spine can also increase a person's risk down the road.
Okay, so we've been deep in the weeds of cells and causes. Let's zoom back out and look at the bigger global picture. Who gets ALS, and where in the world is it most common? When you look at the numbers, some really striking patterns start to emerge.
To really grasp the scale of this, let's start with a pretty stark number: your lifetime risk of developing ALS. It's estimated to be about 1 in 400. Now, when you hear that, it kind of reframes things, right? It shows that this isn't some super rare 1 in a million condition. It's a serious public health issue that affects a lot of families.
The data also points to a really clear difference between men and women. Men consistently have a higher risk of getting ALS, about 1.5 times higher than women, actually. But here's where it gets really interesting. That gap pretty much vanishes after menopause. And that little clue has researchers thinking that female hormones, maybe estrogen, could actually be providing some kind of protection.
And then there's the racial disparity we see in the current data. It's pretty significant. Right now, the vast majority of people diagnosed with ALS, around 93%, are Caucasian. Now, that's what the patient population looks like today, but of course, as the world's demographics change, projections show that this picture could look very different in the future.
But things get really wild when you look at the global map. There are massive differences from one region to another. I mean, we're talking a difference of almost 90 times in the rates between some countries. A gap that huge is a massive clue. It strongly suggests that sporadic ALS isn't just a genetic lottery. It has to be heavily influenced by local factors, things in the environment, lifestyle differences. And that's exactly why this is such a huge focus for researchers all over the world.
So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? I think it's that ALS isn't one single thing with one single cause. It's this incredibly complex puzzle with so many different pieces: genetics, what's going on inside our cells, and triggers from the world around us. And yeah, that complexity is exactly what makes finding a cure so incredibly difficult. But it's also where the hope lies. The answers are hidden in figuring out all those interconnected pathways. And that leaves us with the biggest question of all. With so many targets, where do we even begin?